welcome you here to today's episode of Freedom Hub Working Group. We got a nice guest in store for us today. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with Charles Froman. We are sponsored by your Freedom Hub, where all the activists and entrepreneurial disruptors like to hang out. And like I said, we've got somebody interesting coming up. But before we do, just as a reminder, we are recording these. This is the link to register to get notices for forthcoming ones. The recording is posted every weekend. So come Monday morning, you'll be able to catch them. We're on these 3 different channels, so whichever one you prefer, we're there. Just to give you a taste, there's the Hub site. This is the version up on Brighteon. There's an awful large collection goes on for pages and pages of these things. And then also on BitChute. So it's a nice selection. Please, encourage people to check them out. You'll enjoy them yourself, and subscribe to the channel there if you like it enough. So for tonight, though, let's talk a little bit about what's on our agenda today. So Charles, if you'll do the honors.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome, Robin. I met Robin, I think, at a Freedom Fest event when he was at the We Do Better booth. And he's been prolific online and at a lot of liberty-oriented conventions, particularly for his skill in teaching persuasion. And that book of his, The Art of Political Persuasion, is the work with which he is most known. He is an academic person at the John Locke Institute, and Robin, you can correct the title there. He also has an academic position with the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE. He has a media type organ, Watching America, which he can tell us about. And really, there's always a challenge libertarians have, or anyone that's for markets, on how to persuade the broad populace. So Robin is known as one of the teachers on how to communicate. So today he's going to communicate this trolley problem, which apparently is widely known and something I should know more about, that deals with dilemmas, cost-benefit analyses. If you're going to leave someone behind death-wise with a pandemic, and then you have, on the other hand, the mass destruction through unemployment of people's livelihoods with lockdowns, how does a liberty-oriented person weigh that cost-benefit analysis? And the example of a trolley can help visualize that discussion. So we're looking forward to hearing Robin today, Jeff.
All right, very good.
Thank you
very much. Go for it.
Yeah, and if I may, I'll just correct the title of my book is actually "If You Can Keep It: Why We Nearly Lost It and How We Get It Back." Art of Political Persuasion is kind of the title I use for what I consult and teach in, right, when it comes to political communication psychology. It's not the title of the book, but if you go to my website, which you think kindly briefly show, robinkoerner.com, that will all make sense, and also you can check out more about that book. And there's a great foreword there by Jeffrey Tucker, who's also a well-known libertarian. Actually, since I wasn't going to do that, but since I mentioned Jeffrey Tucker there, I had a very brief text correspondence with him after my article was published, the article that we're going to be discussing today about the trolley problem and COVID-19. And I was very pleased to see this, actually. He was very kind of black and white in his opinion about our response, in as much as he sees this as a situation that simply reveals who the real liberty folks are and who aren't. And he thinks as the data come out on how infectious, contagious this thing is, how deadly it is, and the consequences of our response to it, let's say the purer, simpler liberty position, something along the lines of, hey government, who the hell do you think you are? This is crazy, will become more clearly the one that we should have taken. That's his view. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that was what I got out of the text correspondence I had with him when I sent him my article. So let's talk a little bit about this article, and also, I wasn't writing this as a kind of a libertarian in any way take on the problem we find ourselves in, it was written not by, you know, Robin Koerner, the libertarian. It was written by, I think, Robin Koerner, a guy with some common sense who's into epistemology, and so is often holding his head in his hands when he sees just how badly people make decisions that aren't justified by their knowledge or the evidence they have or think they have. And, you know, people make, you know, we make those kind of errors all the time. You know, we have to make, we live in binaries, right, in many ways. Either you do something or you don't, but obviously the information we have is always incomplete. It might be grayer than the black and white decisions we have to make when we choose to do something or not. So I get all of that, but usually those kind of decisions don't result in potentially the deaths of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And if they do, we don't sit by and go, well, that's okay then, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And moreover, we don't, en masse as a society, support those decisions. And so just to be clear, I'm also going to take issue with the slide that I was introduced with that said something about livelihoods. This isn't about how many lives do we save for how many livelihoods we destroy. It's not about that at all. It's about how many lives do we destroy for how many lives that we save. Because the livelihoods problem, the economy, the economic consequences are just a link in the causal chain between our reaction and all of the harms to health that are going to happen as a consequence of our reaction to COVID-19. And we have to weigh up not only, but we have to include in our weighing up of what we, of the cost benefit here, the actual negative physical and mental negative impacts on all the people affected by our actions. And by our actions, I mean, you know, this lockdown, forbidding people from leaving the house, for living their normal lives, socializing in the normal way. We know that poverty correlates with bad health outcomes and therefore lost years of life, whether that's just through, you know, bad nutrition or lack of access to medical care, or, you know, being more affected by things, well, like other viruses or infections or other things that might, you know, roll off the back of healthy people, and rich people don't roll off the back of poor people. So we chose to put loads of people into situations of joblessness, poverty to some extent, and homelessness. There are people who've lost their homes very quickly, which I actually referenced in the article, as a result of what we've done. So I saw what the world was doing, and I'm like, the world is going mad. And I thought, I've got to say something about this. Why am I so sure that the world is going mad? And I thought, well, it's the trolley problem. It's the trolley problem, which is just a well-known problem in the departments of moral philosophy in universities around the world. And it's simply this. I mean, it's a class of problems, but here's an exemplar. A trolley is loose from a train. It's about to roll down a track. It's, I don't know, going downhill. It's about to roll down a track and hit three people who are playing on the track. And you're standing by the points switch, so you can, you know, send the trolley onto another track. And if you flick that switch, you can send the trolley down another track where you can see there's only one person standing. So you're going to save one life. So you're going to, if you flick the switch, you'll save the three, but take the one. Now, extremely superficially, that might seem like a good idea because you net save two lives. The question, the problem is raised in moral philosophy because it goes to moral intuition. If you were to do that, then if you were to flick that point switch, then you have to live having known that you were responsible for the death of the man on that other track. Now, if you don't flip the point switch and the three people get killed, but were going to get killed anyway if you weren't there, are you responsible for the death of the three in the same way that you were responsible for the death of the one? Moral intuition says it's not the same thing. Now, people diverge on whether they would actually kill the one to save the three or not in these problems. But in thinking about it, we get to our moral intuitions. This is the point of these trolley problems. So here we're seeing something of a trolley problem, it seems to me, because the government is deciding that on one track are all the people who are going to die of COVID, unknown and unnamed, and the number, by the way, that we can't calculate at this point. And on the other track, well, the way they're behaving, it's not that there's fewer people on the other track that the government sends the trolley down. It's that there are none. It's that, okay, we're going to be harmed. We might lose wealth. We might, become, there's going to be negative consequences, but nothing akin to the loss of life. Well, for the reasons that I outlined before, that's ridiculous. There will be loss of life. There will be people with, let's say, maybe they're sober from drugs who fall back into drugs that kill them. There are people who are suicidal who can't handle this situation. And it tips them over the edge. And there are all the people who, for example, in my native country of Britain, had their treatments for cancer cancelled because all of these beds in short order had to be opened up for helping the treatment of people with COVID-19, before we knew, of course, how many there were. So lots of decisions have been made that have harmed some at the expense of others, so it's a trolley problem. Now, the superficial response to the trolley problem by some is essentially utilitarian, right? If you're going to flip the switch, it might be because, well, 3 lives are worth more than 1. It's better to hurt fewer to help, to reverse more harm than you cause. All right. But as I also talking about in the article, we've got to consider utilitarianism a little more, because nobody really is a pure utilitarian. We could kill people. In fact, we could actually farm people for their organs and then kill them, take their organs nice and fresh, the lungs, the kidneys, the heart. I mean, now we're transplanting hands, faces, and feet, and the liver, and we could save many lives and improve many lives by doing that. We could kill one person and save multiple lives. Most people would say that's outrageous. So you can't do that. Everyone has a right to life. They've certainly got a right not to be murdered. Murder is wrong. Doesn't matter what your reason. Okay, and I think that applies here. Again, because I think our actions will be taking lives to save other lives. And I think there's an analogy. But more than that, the problem for me is even worse. Because what we could do is take 1 kidney out of all of the people, healthy people walking around with 2 kidneys, and use that kidney to save a life without significantly, or maybe even at all, hurting the person who loses the 2nd kidney and has a perfectly healthy 1st kidney. But we don't do that either. Like, we could save lives without knowingly harming people, in this example, with 2 kidneys. But we don't do that. We think that's outrageous. I think it's outrageous. And if you're a libertarian, you might have a natural rights view of that. You might even have a property-based view of, why nobody can come and take your kidney out against your will. But whatever it is, whether you have any kind of moral or political philosophy or not, most people will say, well, obviously that's not okay. Well, if that's not okay, why is it okay for the government to do any actual material harm to tens of millions of people, if we're talking about the United States, to maybe save a smaller number of unknown people? And I say maybe, because here's my other reason for being extremely uncomfortable with the morality of what's being done. Everybody at risk of being hit by COVID-19, indeed, anybody at risk of being hit by anything, any infectious contagious disease, like regular flu in the winter, whatever it might be, we all have agency. So if you go back to the trolley problem, it's not like the people on the track that the government doesn't want the trolley to go down, who will be killed by COVID-19, don't have some ability, some choice to get off the track. So in that sense, the trolley problem's not a great exemplar. Knowing that the people on the track with the COVID-19 coming can assess their own risk and choose whether to keep standing there, by which I mean, if you are scared of catching it, you can do voluntarily what we all are supposedly being forced to do now, which is stay at home, which is keep social distance or physical distance. You know, only go to the supermarket and the stores, you know, once a week rather than every day, right? People who feel they're more at risk from the harms of COVID-19 can make that choice. My mother, for example, is in a vulnerable group. She's in her mid-70s. She's scared of the consequences of getting this. She also has underlying health conditions, which, you know, according to the statistics, would put her in a category she doesn't want to be in were she to get it. She isn't leaving her house except for a walk every other day with her partner in an unpopulated area. Groceries are being delivered to her, and she's fortunate my sister can do that. Other people in the community can do that. But anyway, if they couldn't, she would only be going out, you know, with her mask on. She'd be taking much greater precautions. She's loaded up on sanitizer, you know, the whole thing that we would all be doing if we were concerned. The government doesn't need to lock us down and destroy jobs for those most at risk who choose to protect themselves in that way. So it seems to me that any kind of moral justification for what we're doing with the lockdown, for these government positions is, I mean, some part of me feels it's almost groundless, certainly flimsy. Now, when I say almost groundless, I know that the objection is, oh yeah, but you know, the negative externality of people going around and doing all the things that we're not allowed to do right now is that we increase the risk of vulnerable people in getting COVID-19. Well, sure, but that kind of negative externality, that's just life, right? I mean, there might be a slightly, and we don't even know this, but there might be a slightly higher chance of somebody getting harmed by this particular virus because I go to a store. Although, of course, I actually reject that because they have agency here. They don't have to be in the store when I'm there. If the restaurants were allowed to be open, I could go to the restaurant, the owner could open his restaurant, but the old person doesn't have to go visit the restaurant and expose themselves. But maybe there's a negative externality. But there's a negative externality in everything we allow people to do as free people in life, right? I mean, 100 people die on the roads just over of the United States every day. Well, on exactly the same principled argument, why don't we limit the number of miles people can drive a day? I can guarantee you that I could save multiple thousands of lives a year if we had a mileage limit on each individual. We don't do that. Why not? It seems to me that if we're going to be morally consistent about what we are doing, if we have a principled basis for it, or if we claim to have a principled basis for it, we should at least be asking what other aspects of our lives, other things that we do that are dangerous, these principles apply to. Driving would certainly be one. So I've got huge problems with this. But then on top of that, not only are we, I think, not being consistent, there are certain things in our psychological mental makeup that cause us to make these decisions badly, to actually bias towards suboptimal outcomes. And again, I want to remind everyone, this isn't suboptimal vis-a-vis livelihoods. It's suboptimal vis-a-vis actual lives. Physical, so economic consequences include health outcomes. Okay, so some of these I list in the article. And I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but I think in my article about this, I pick 3 that I think are very much at play. One of them is the pseudo certainty bias. We know, and all of these things have been studied, that people tend to be more risk averse in seeking positive outcomes, but more risk preferring in avoiding negative outcomes. So in other words, we do more dangerous things because we're too scared of the negative things that might happen to us. So we'll do more dangerous things to avoid them. So this clearly to me is an example of that. We are destroying the economic lives of some people, massively negatively impacting them of other people. We're sending, as I say, letters to people who need operations to tell them that they can't have them yet because we have to keep the beds free for these COVID people that might, we're taking huge risks to save ourselves the negative outcome of the dramatic COVID death numbers that we're expecting. Yeah, so that's one. And the other thing is the optimism bias. We underestimate the probability of undesirable outcomes. Now, that means in this regard, that is what I think we're seeing. Nobody did the math on the undesirable outcomes of the decisions we've taken, right? I mean, at least somebody should have mentioned the fact that there's a calculation to be done, there's a determination as to, let's say, a low base high prediction. Single point predictions are always completely useless, but a low base high prediction on the number of deaths that will be caused by the decisions we're about to take to lock down for, get this, it was an indefinite period, right? So when we locked down, any of the bases for doing so were bases that we didn't know when they would stop applying, right? So we have open-ended harm. Well, given that we have open-ended harm that we're deciding to do, we're obviously, you could make a case that we're infinitely underestimating the consequences of the harmful decision that we're taking, right? I mean, we've discounted, regardless of the potentially infinite time horizon, we've discounted the harm that we might be causing to necessarily below the harm that we are reversing by reducing the numbers of COVID patients and deaths, supposedly. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's absurd from an epistemic point of view. It's absurd from a statistical point of view. Now, if a politician wanted to come out and say, yeah, that calculus needs to be done, but we just can't do it, and we're so scared that we're just going to take this, path anyway, but we do own the fact that we know we're killing people, by the way, then at least there would have been some honesty to that. At least I would have believed that there was some nod to moral consistency. But I didn't see any of that. And the thing that disturbed me the most, it wasn't just this series of decisions, but it was the series of decisions and the magnitude of those decisions, absent all of these obvious considerations. I mean, if they're obvious to me, then they should be obvious to people who are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in various agencies, the CDC, statistical offices, and the White House, government statistical offices in the White House. I'm not, or indeed governor's mansion. I mean, I find it, as you can tell by the way I'm getting fired up here, I find the way we've got into this disturbing. And the final bias that I mention in my article that I think has contributed to us making a bad decision here is the availability bias. And I think this might be the biggest one. And I think as someone who cares about liberty, it's maybe for me the scariest one. Because I haven't actually explicitly talked about loss of rights yet, but obviously that does underlie this whole discussion. The availability bias, frankly, wasn't called that when Bastiat was writing, but this is the seen and the unseen, right? The availability bias is that we give too much weight to outcomes that we can see, right? Well, we can see, oh, look, somebody got the disease, now they're dead. That's easy. We can see it in short order. It's on every news show. It's on all the websites. It's on the Drudge Report on the, in the morning. You can see the numbers. There's links there to the SITMAP. We can see that. So we overreact to that, and we underreact to the things we don't see, right? And this is why I say, it's Bastiat, and I'm bastardizing it a little bit, but it's kind of a version of the broken window fantasy, right? So we don't see the harms we're going to cause when the person, let's say, who was made homeless, did lose their job, had some operation cancelled because of rediverted medical resources, or whatever it might be. We don't see the lost number of years of their life, right? We don't see that. Now, I'm starting to hear in podcasts, there's a great podcast in the UK. It's called the Coronavirus Newscast. And for the first time this week, I was listening to it when I was running, and they read out a letter from a 53-year-old man, I want to say with 4 children, that had been written to be told that his operation for a, what was it for? It was for a cancer, and I can't remember which, was cancelled until such time as the COVID thing was over. He had been told that the operation would give him 100%, before this all happened, he had 100% survival chance with the operation. He had a 20 to 30% survival chance without it. And he literally asked in this letter to this podcast that was read out on the BBC, is my life as a 53-year-old man with 4 kids worth less than the life of someone who may contract COVID? That's my question. And it's reasonable that we can ask it, but what I don't think is reasonable that people with power, with monopoly on power, get to make this decision for all of us in a situation where, and this is the crux, and I am repeating myself, but it's the crux, any negative externality of unsafe behaviors that other people may exhibit is a negative externality that I have agency to reduce or avoid. And I would, you know, I could talk more about this, but let me end with this thought and then throw it out to any of you who want to ask me any questions. If you asked people, you have 2 options. One is you live your life normally, you keep your job, everything goes on as normal. But if you get this COVID-19, and you can take whatever precautions you want, but if you get COVID-19, you're at the bottom of the pile for treatment. In fact, if you get anything during this pandemic, you are at the bottom of the pile for treatment. The people at the top of the pile for treatment are the people who take option B. They're the people that are completely locked down. They follow all the rules, right, that have been imposed on us. They don't go to work, they socially distance, they agree to do it for an indefinite period, you know, et cetera, right? You get to choose A or B. If you choose B and you follow all these rules that are being forced on us, then you're top of the queue, you know, top of the pile for treatment if anything happens to you. A or B. I think that most people, and you know, I've done unscientific surveys on this, I think that most people would choose A. People would choose to keep working for their families. Restaurateurs would choose to keep their businesses going, for example. Even on the understanding, to augment the scenario a little bit, that they have to allow workers who want to do option B to not turn up to work and keep their jobs open. And you know what? All of this government money that's being thrown out of helicopters right now on account of our current response could be actually sent to companies of employees that are scared and choose option B to help keep that job open. It would cost us all a lot less, but we would still have agency, responsibility. We wouldn't have this unbelievable, as I have asserted, unprincipled throwing out of our most fundamental rights. It really is an emperor has no clothes. And I'm not saying it's the emperor has no clothes just because of the decision we've arrived at. I'm saying it's emperor has no clothes because of the decision we've arrived at and the way, the ignorance, the bias with which we've arrived at it, the lack of justification, moral and statistical, and even psychological. So I think that's everything I wanted to say up front, and I invite you to ask me any questions or talk about anything that comes to mind as a result of that.
Very good. I'm going to have everyone raise hands that has a question in mind. That was quite good. Definitely has everyone thinking for sure. And, you know, it's kind of frustrating for many when you suddenly put everything in a proper context, because then they see the dichotomy of what they decided in one instance as opposed to the other.
And actually, you know, that's a good point. And let me respond to that. It reminds me of a thought that I think is worth sharing. If it is the case that we discover that most people, let's say, who died of this thing, and I think the data are probably already in on this, but I am always open to better data. are in identifiable high-risk groups, meaning age-related, underlying health condition-related, also certain lifestyle factor-related, like obesity seems to be a huge one. Yeah, if it is the case that outside those groups, the death rate is not, let's say, an order of magnitude greater than that of flu, and we get the data in, and years from now we look at, somebody studies, as they probably will, how many years of lives have been lost through forced joblessness, forced homelessness, forced negative health results of this decision. And it turns out that the consequences are worse than, not only than what would have happened if we hadn't done this, but let's say 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, which is possible. Then I feel that the decision can really only be morally justified. If I were making the decision, it would only be morally justified. If I could say, yes, but at that time, it was still the right decision based on the evidence available, right? You need to be able to say, it is true that good decisions can have bad outcomes. That is true when you live in a probabilistic world of insufficient information and uncertainty. That is true, but you have to be able to justify the decision made at the time, and regardless of how it all plays out. And I just think, absent consideration of all of the things I've discussed, nobody's going to be able to do that once the data are in. And I think we could be absolutely ashamed of ourselves, and I think we should be. I think in the same way that we should be ashamed of ourselves for the innocent lives we took in Baghdad, right, on a justification of weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be false. It's analogous to me, right? Because we've done unforced harm with fake moral cover. I don't know. It's interesting, I've not actually had a discussion like this. I wrote that article, but I've not actually talked about it. It's the first time I'm doing that, and I'm feeling the emotion of it as I'm talking about it. It's kind of even worse than I thought. But anyway, thank you. I pulled your thread, but yes.
Well, and to tangent off that for a quick second, then we definitely get to some questions. But you could have had like that moral cover, like with the Baghdad thing. But now we're in a situation where people, I don't want to have to make this decision. I'm a little fearful, or I'm too focused on just my navel, or who's my favorite sports team of the week, and so I'm going to delegate this decision to those authorities, people that supposedly smarter than I, yet you're giving it to a person who doesn't know what they're talking about, these politicians, and their whole mentality is, well, I either need to not look bad in the press or do nothing that's going to cause me to not get reelected. So all of their motivations have nothing to do with what you just said about making a decision about yourself.
I do. And that's a good point, and that raises another point, which I didn't directly touch on, but I actually have a little bit of inside information on the decision making in a particular country. This comes from a man who was in the room when a national leader made a decision to, so I can't be more specific, but made a decision to more or less change the policy of the country. From something that was going more in a herd immunity direction to a lockdown direction. The discussion in that room involved the fact that at that time, modeling had been done in various scenarios. And the worst case number of deaths in the do nothing scenario had been, let's say, allowed to be put in the public domain by the scientist who was responsible for the modeling. In other words, the scientist didn't whisper his findings into the ears of the political leaders. And this meant that the political leaders knew that very soon the large number of deaths, and for this country in question, it was a large number, the higher number of deaths, high end of the range in the do nothing scenario, was going to scare people, and there was going to be popular demand for government action, for hard government action. And the decision was taken that with the media stirring that up, and as in a way irresponsibly kind of simplifying the output of the model, that politically, it would be impossible to take the optimal decision, which was between do nothing and lockdown. Here's the advice: do these measures in these circumstances, but we don't have to lock the country down. It was decided that that just wouldn't be feasible because there would be, the political fallout would be too great on the one hand, so it's a political decision. And on the other hand, the population was so unsophisticated in following even a 10-word instruction about how to stay healthy, that following the 100 or 200-word instruction that would, capture the optimal approach on a nationwide scale to resolving this without destroying the economy. It was seen that people just weren't smart enough to do it, especially with the media putting out the information in the way that they put it out. And by the way, on that point, I would invite anybody to read the first, and I think perhaps largest chapter of my book, if you can keep it at the beginning, where I really go into this, because so many bad political decisions rest on how the media processes reality and then how our minds process what the media give us. And I mean media in the broadest sense. I don't just mean, Fox News and MSNBC, right? So you've really got to understand this. So I have it on good authority. And I don't blame the politicians for this because they have to make political decisions. That, lockdown decisions in at least one major country were largely political decisions. But what I do blame us for is that we don't have to create the context in which we as the people, in which that is the optimal political decision. We should know better. And we do know better because nobody I know says, yeah, I think we should go around harvesting everybody's second kidney and donating it to people who need one. Nobody I know says we should go around, killing this guy over here so that we've got 10 organs to save 10 lives. We do know better than that. So what the hell are we standing by and letting the government flip the switch for us for? Absolutely outrageous. Shame on us.
Absolutely so. David, I see you got your hand up.
Hi, Robin. This is David Demarest in
Good to see you
Omaha.
again, David.
Good to see you, Robin. So one could say that the safest way to avoid unintended consequences is to do nothing, but that's not really true. Whether you choose to do something or nothing, there are unintended consequences.
Agree.
And dealing with unintended consequences requires forethought, long-term planning. We knew well in advance that there were possibilities of pandemics. The politicians knew it. They did nothing about it. And we know from Hans Hermann Hoppe, his theory on time preference rate, that politicians have a high time preference rate. They deal in the here and now.
Right.
While they're in power. After they're out of power, they could care less. Whereas entrepreneurs, you could say, deal with low time preference rate, looking to the future. So the fact that politicians, by nature, are focused on the here and now and not planning for the future, they're totally unprepared to deal with unintended consequences, regardless of whether they decide to do something or nothing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great point, and I think it reminds me of, it's really a fundamental problem of governments and certainly the big state, which is that it lulls us all into a sense of security, right? The reason, in my native country of Britain, of course, we have the National Health Service. So everybody thinks, well, the government's taking care of health, right? In both my native and my adoptive country, the adoptive country, of course, being the US, we have Social Security and we have these things. So people think, oh, well, I don't have to make provision for things that I, as a private individual, should be making provision for. I am responsible for. There are things I am responsible for. And that if I took that responsibility and I went into the market with that responsibility, and I saw the product or service I would need to meet that responsibility, such as protections against what we're facing now and anything else, I would be much better placed. because, you know, to kind of just run with what you're saying, a company whose job it is to protect, let's say, me from what supposedly I'm supposed to be really scared of right now, COVID-19, that company has to get it right today so that they've still got a business tomorrow and next year. And, you know, and that isn't true for the state. You know, you know, I'm sure you and I also share the view, David, that the problem is that, I was going to say that the government knows a lot less than it thinks it does, right? It's a lot less expert than it thinks it is. And one of the reasons for that is that the incentives are all wrong. It goes to the time preference point. That's one of many that speaks to this. But you know, the more fundamental problem than that is we all know much less than we think we do, right? But a market trade imposes discipline that is not imposed on the government. So the government has this monopoly of force. So when they get things wrong, there's nothing to stop them. There's just no end to it, right? They get things wrong for all of us, and then there's no redress. You know, it's much safer to be wrong. You're going to do much less harm being wrong if you don't have a monopoly of force over tens of millions, or in the case of the US, hundreds of millions of people. You know, we all need to be much more skeptical of, you know, as we say in England, the great and the good in making life and death decisions for us. We've got to do this. It's a cultural change, and I know you and I, you know, share that view. And you know, and I think you and I, you know, both have devoted many years to trying to move culture in that direction. We are way too credulous. We are way too scared, and we are way too comfortable with anybody holding a monopoly of force.
Here to that. Charles?
Robin, that was just a fantastic presentation, and that last recommendation to let folks stay home if they, with their agency, feel they need to do so, and then limit the bailouts to those folks who want to keep their jobs. You know, that's a strange thing for a liberty person to support, but it's certainly less unlibertarian than what they've done now.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's a panacea. I'm just throwing it out there as exactly that. Obviously, much better from every point of view. You know, yeah.
And I was going to invite Dr. Singleton, if she doesn't mind being put on the spot, sort of comment as a former president of the largest AMA alternative group out there, the APS, on how she responds to your presentation, given that her mostly free market inclined doctors probably feel the same way a bit. Dr. Singleton, are you available to give a quick comment?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that analysis. It's interesting, when I was in law school, I took a course called The Morality of Life and Death. And of course, the trolley problem was one of the problems that comes up. And this whole idea of trading lives just doesn't work. It's another one is this, if a horde of evil folks come to your town and they say, no one in your town will die if you will sacrifice this one 5-year-old child, what do you do? Besides the practical aspect that how can you believe anybody who said they're going to kill a kid, that they're probably lying anyway, that you can't trade lives like that. And people do have to make their own decisions. And certainly, as more information about COVID came out and we learned more about it and it wasn't as lethal as people thought, etc., your concept really hits home. Let people decide. I'm in that group where they could say, well, you need to be locked up forever because you might get sick because I take a high blood pressure pill. Well, I'm say, fine, no, I'm going to risk my life and go out to the bar because I take care of myself otherwise. So we have to make those own decisions. And then they have people carrying posters around here saying, if you're out here at the beach, I live near the beach, and that's the big bone of contention out here is they've closed all the parks and the beaches. If you go to the beach, then you shouldn't get any treatment in the hospital if you get COVID, and you shouldn't take any resources from society. And but we aren't even allowed that. If you say, okay, fine, I'll pay for it myself, whatever, they don't even want to go that far. And I do believe that this COVID, you know, this is far beyond medicine. And most of the folks in my group believe that this is an opportunity to exert control and get people used to agreeing that the government is always right. And people are succumbing to it. There are people who are complaining because the governor said he wants to open schools in August, and they're saying, should I get a gas mask for my child? Even though only 2 children have died from it. And then we don't even know the underlying conditions of those children.
Right.
And they're totally freaked out. They want our children to die. Well, they aren't going to die. But this is how, and you mentioned the media, how the media hammered and hammered and hammered. It's COVID 24/7. That I think they've done their job well. They have beaten people into submission.
And that moving forward mentality, just to add on that, how about they're now harping the drum that we can't go back till we've got a vaccine?
Oh, no. Which, of course, is the goalpost that they have set.
Yeah, it seemed like that was the 1-2 punch. It was scare you to death. Boom, here's the solution, which is what we wanted you to consume and spend money on in the end anyway.
And which, of course, everybody wonders what the financial benefit behind all of this is. That first, the reason for locking us in our homes was to so-called flatten the curve, to make it so the hospitals wouldn't be overwhelmed. Where I am, 2 of our biggest hospitals are empty, and they furloughed 40% of the nurses.
You know, that's gone on here where I am in Seattle. I have
Well,
a
there you
friend
go.
who recently had to go to hospital, and she said it was the scariest thing. She said, I thought I was going to be scared because of all the COVID patients. She said I was scared because I walked into hospital and the emergency section was completely empty. And it turns out it's like something out of a zombie movie, but not the kind of plot you expect, you know? I mean, like, what more do we need? Oh, God.
Well, this is what's so strange. But that was the goal. This is why you have to believe that there's another motive behind it, because the curve is flattened. And now all that's doing is stretching it out. So those folks who get these mild cases, which are probably more than they've even measured, won't have the opportunity to get the mild case and be done with it. So one has to wonder about the thought process behind this. And all we can do is assert ourselves and keep asserting ourselves and not taking it, because once you hang back, I have a great picture. I'll have to send it to Jeff. And it was a picture of an entire pasture full of sheep with masks on. And this is how we've become, and not questioning anything. And seeing people driving down the street, they have gloves on their hands,
and
a mask on their face. They're in the car alone with the window rolled up.
Do you know, I actually laughed out loud in the post office the other day because they put up the bulletproof plastic between the, you know what I mean, at the desk, right? Which was never there. I'm in a little, I'm in Seattle, in the little kind of a villagey area on the edge of the city. And so I go in, and since the previous time I've been in, this bulletproof plastic's gone up. And the woman behind the post office worker behind the desk had on her mask. And every single, but there was nobody else there. So she was on her own behind the glass, right? And all of the customers, I was the only one that wasn't wearing one, didn't have they had a mask. I was the only one that didn't. And I'm like, she's probably wearing a government-issued mask that she's been told to wear because the bulletproof glass apparently isn't enough to stop this virus. And all of the customers had the mask on, and they're all, obeying these stickers on the ground with a 6-foot thing. And I'm like, yeah, because bulletproof glass isn't enough. And I just found the whole thing, I just found it funny. And the thing that scares me, and I get that, and I want to be clear about this, how people respond to a situation like this at the extremes is primarily a function of their personality. And my personality, and this is something to do with my upbringing and my Englishness and all of that, is I hate drama. I like understatement. I'm disposed to, everybody calm the hell down, right? So I get that I might be on that end of the spectrum. But what scares me is that nobody else is like that, right? It's like we've all bought into it, as you were saying, And one of the things that interests me as somebody in the liberty movement is I go to these liberty events and I often get, this has happened more than once, it's happened a few times. I get asked to, take the minarchist position or the pragmatist position in a debate against anarchists, right? As if, I'm the one that is soft on principle. People sometimes talk like that, which I completely object to. And here I am, and I'm watching all of these so-called really principled people. And okay, so it wasn't that issue that made them start compromising their principles, but this is, it's this one. Oh, how fascinating. So actually, if I want to completely take over the country and have everybody sign up for statism and tyranny, including half the Libertarian Party, this is how you do it. Who knew? Well, it didn't fool me, but it seems to be fooling quite a few of these supposedly principled anarchy types, and I find that fascinating. And I'm wondering if everybody has a point where the rest of us can discover our principles aren't really our principles. I find that interesting. I'm kind of going off in a different direction with that comment. But
what's funny about what you're commenting though is the fact that common sense sort of seems to have gone away. I saw a great meme that played to that mentality. It said the same person that believes a piece of fabric over your face is going to stop COVID is the exact same person that believes underpants stops a fart.
No comment.
And the same like with that book. I told somebody at the store I saw when they came back, and you're right, they had this plastic put up at the grocery store. And I'm like, I guess this is an interim step, but you better start to worry when they come in and take this glass out and put bulletproof glass in here. Then we're in trouble, buddy. Yeah. So David, we got time for a quick question here before we run out of time today.
So, Robin, if, as Dr. Singleton said, people agree that government solutions are not in our self-interest, what are your thoughts on the best way to nullify government death by regulation? In other words, civil disobedience. Doctors are nullifying regulations. Why not the rest of us?
Did you say doctors are nullifying relations, did you say?
Regulation. So
regulations.
Dr. Chu in the Seattle area, for example, that story.
I don't.
So Dr. Chu back in January was suspicious about some deaths due to COVID type symptoms, and she decided, and her colleagues decided to test the cadavers. They did. Reported it to the government. The government said, wonderful, stop your testing. Don't tell anybody about this. And she said, you know what you can do with that order. And they continued testing. So doctors are driven by the Hippocratic Oath. What oath do we need as people? Maybe the Golden Rule Oath to get past that tendency to underplay things and sit around quietly without disobeying civilly?
Yeah, it's funny because last year, I don't know if I got such a bee under my bonnet about what was going on in Britain with Brexit. And I started calling for civil disobedience. or at least I was out loud wondering why civil disobedience hadn't even begun. Quite some time before it all reached, well, before I actually signed up for the Brexit Party and got on a plane and went over there and stood for Parliament, briefly. I'm for peaceful civil disobedience. When appropriate. I certainly do think, it's a tough one, right? Because you're never in anybody else's shoes. So there's a lot of libertarians, for example, that disagree completely morally, philosophically on with taxation, but they pay taxes because they don't want to go to jail. And you could peacefully not pay your taxes, but you will go to jail. So I completely respect somebody paying their taxes, even though superficially you might say, oh, well, that's inconsistent. That impinges on your integrity if you say that it's that it's wrong. But to pay taxes. And so I would say the same thing about anybody in any situation. But certainly I think in the example that you give, the more direct the harm you're being asked to do on account of the regulation, the more you need to consider, hopefully deliver on, disobedience. But I think that judgment always has to be made, because they will come at you with guns, and they will come at you with, all the things they come at you with. You asked me a general question, that's a general answer, and in a way I realize it probably sounds evasive, because it's not really much of an answer. Again, I would agree with you, David. I know that we all bend over way too much, for government.
No one really likes confrontation. That's the challenge. I mean, not too many people willing to
Well,
stand up and take the heat.
I mean, I don't mind confrontation. I'm comfortable with it, but I'm not going to spend my life in jail. Unless I'm absolutely sure it's worth it, right?
Yeah. Like I'm up to confrontation too, until you say, oh, but by the way, at the end, the guy with the gun shows up. Oh, okay, wait a minute. Maybe not so much confrontation after all.
Jeff?
And that's the fear. Yeah, Charles, we got time for one good last one here.
Matt and I want to make a quick comment about the struggle his RSC candidates are having with the COVID response on the campaign trail.
Go. Excellent.
Matt,
great perspective, please.
Yeah, so I think somebody mentioned at the very beginning that this is a great litmus test for people who claim to be pro-liberty, and we're very much seeing that in the political space, and specifically on some of our email lists, where some of these lists were built based on Facebook ads, built on various issues, and there was one particular list that was built on some ads that we were kind of iffy on when they ran. And anyway, that's the one when we're running these stop the lockdown, in the lockdown type email series, the vast majority of our unsubscribes are coming kind of from a particular segment. But what's more disturbing is, I'm sure you guys all saw Thomas Massie, just by virtue of the fact that he asked for a roll call vote, was absolutely eviscerated by the president and pretty much every major politician in the country. And so I think the way this is all going to shake out politically as time goes on, Thomas Massie, the South Dakota governor, Kristi Noem, they are going to look like, brilliant heroes, and everybody that was for the lockdown, I'm talking about from a political perspective, Cuomo up in New York, even with what he's dealing with, they're going to look like complete tyrants. And as the economy continues to crash, I think it'll be, it'll turn in our favor. Like we're already seeing when we first started doing these emails about in the lockdown, and we were on the cusp of it here in Florida when DeSantis, like right out of the gate, he shut down the bars and nightclubs during Bike Week in Daytona. And I was posting, asking for legal opinions and things like that. Could he do that? We were very much ahead of the curve, that these responses were draconian, and we were, thoroughly castigated on social media and even on some of our lists. So it's very interesting, again, as the evidence that the models were faulty and that this was all done based on bad data. I think you're going to see a turn. You're already seeing a turn you know, with kind of the mainstream Fox, Hannity, those guys. You know, they're trying to paint Governor DeSantis as some sort of hero, and he, you know, he definitely didn't do us any favors here in Florida. So, but he was less, but they're painting him as a hero because he was less draconian than, you know, some of the other governors were. So,
to your point, and to David's point previously, kind of speaking with my political psychology hat on, what we're going to need to do is kind of put fire under this sentiment as people look back, as I kind of touched on this earlier in the talk, right?
mm-hmm.
As the data come out and we get to see what actually was done to us, we, people of liberty mind, people of, I would say, common sense, need to be heard in our moral outrage, right? We have to make it clear that it's not okay,
Right.
that this was harm actively done. Because, you know, one of the things, and I teach this a lot in political psychology, the thing that unites people across the political spectrum, and if you want to start an insurgency, you have to use this, all insurgencies use this, is a basic offense against a very kind of simple human sense of justice. It offends everybody
Mm-hmm.
that somebody made a decision that, let's say, they had no right to make, that did massive harm. As the data come out and as the information come out over time on what data they didn't have when they made that decision, right? On what they didn't know, on the justifications they used that weren't true, people will feel that that something not just careless, but unjustified was done. And we have to build that. We have to push that. That's the way that you get people to be upset and not allow it to be done again.
Right.
Which I think partially goes to David's question, which I don't know that I answered in a satisfactory way. We've always got to be on the lookout for those openings, right? Unforced injustice done to us by state, by politics, by politicians. And that's always a political open goal when it turns up, and this might become one.
Absolutely, I agree.
Opportunities
Huge
having so many
opportunity.
upset people, you know, just having that people where we need them meant to be aggravated. Otherwise, they don't ever want to take action or move.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's right.
Thanks so much for today, Robin. That was a really great conversation. We could have kept going forever here, but we're already way past our time. So definitely appreciate you being here today.
And I
Thank you.
I see David has just put up another question, and I just want to acknowledge that and
Go for
say, yeah, maybe that's another conversation we can have another time. But one of the reasons that I got on that plane to go to England for Brexit is I'm all about self-determination, and which I think is something he mentioned Hopper too earlier, and I think that's a word that Hopper likes. I like self-determination, so I'm happy to have that discussion with you, David.